I made the garage door slam like I was angry enough to leave forever. That was the first lie I told that night. The second was when I backed my SUV out of the driveway, turned right at the maple tree with the split trunk, and drove 3 streets over like a woman who needed air before she said something unforgivable. The October rain had turned Naperville glossy and black, and the streetlights shivered in every puddle along Emerson Court. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my stomach had gone cold in that strange, clean way it does when fear stops being fear and becomes information. I was not running. I parked behind the closed pharmacy on Washington Street, waited 6 minutes, then drove back with my headlights off for the last 100 yards. The side garage door still stuck the same way it had stuck for 7 years, swelling whenever the weather changed. I lifted it slowly, breathed through the scrape of the frame, and stepped into the dark laundry room that smelled of detergent, rainwater, and the chicken casserole I had pulled from the oven before the fight. Upstairs, my husband thought I was gone. That was useful. The old baby monitor sat in the hall closet behind a box of Easter decorations and a cracked humidifier. We had bought it when our daughter Sophie was 4 and terrified of sleeping alone after a bad fever dream. The plastic had yellowed around the edges, and the green power light blinked weakly when I plugged it in beside the guest room bed. Static hissed through the speaker first, then the soft thump of Daniel moving around downstairs, then the familiar click of a bottle cap against the kitchen counter. I sat on the edge of the mattress and waited. His voice came through 10 seconds later, too relaxed for a man whose wife had just left in the middle of a storm. "She finally drove off," he said. "No, Vanessa, she bought it. I told you she would." My name was Claire Whitaker, and I had been married to Daniel for 19 years, 3 months, and 11 days. I had balanced our mortgage, managed our daughter's panic attacks, filed the insurance claims after his shoulder surgery, and built a life so clean from the outside that our neighbors used us as shorthand for stability. Daniel was a senior operations director at Meridian Foods. Vanessa Cole was the woman he had loved in college, lost at 22, and apparently rediscovered at 46 with a divorce decree, a diamond tennis bracelet, and a talent for making old men feel unfinished. The monitor crackled. "No, she won't fight it," Daniel said. "She hates scenes. She'll sign the papers once I explain it's better for Sophie. And the house equity is already handled. Mom said Claire never reads anything unless it's tax season." I did not move. The guest room smelled faintly of cedar chips from the storage chest and dust from the vents. Rain tapped the window in uneven little clicks. Downstairs, the man who had kissed my forehead that morning was discussing me like an appliance he needed removed before the new furniture arrived. Then Vanessa laughed softly through the speaker. "What about the signature issue?" Daniel sighed, annoyed, not afraid. "It's done. Rick pushed the closing through on Friday. The bank email went to the address I set up. Claire has no idea the line of credit exists." The room narrowed. I heard the furnace tick on. "The first wire clears Monday," he continued. "48,000 to your consulting account, 34 to the Scottsdale rental deposit, and the rest after the foundation reimbursement. Once the reunion fundraiser is over, we leave clean." There are moments in a marriage when betrayal is not emotional anymore. It becomes arithmetic. 48,000, 34,000, a fake email, a pushed closing, a name used without permission. I had spent 14 years as a fraud analyst before I stepped back to handle Sophie's health and Daniel's travel schedule. I knew the shape of bank fraud the way some people know birdsong. I knew how men like Daniel talked when they believed kindness was stupidity, and I knew exactly how much danger someone was in when they confused a quiet woman with an uninformed one. I pressed record on my phone and placed it beside the monitor. My hands stopped shaking. That afternoon had started with pancakes. Not special pancakes, not birthday pancakes, just the kind I made on Saturdays because routine had become my way of keeping the walls from cracking. The kitchen windows were fogged at the edges. The air smelled of maple syrup and coffee gone slightly burnt, and Daniel sat at the island wearing his Northwestern hoodie while scrolling through his phone with a thumb that moved too fast. Sophie came in with damp hair, oversized headphones around her neck, and a chemistry textbook pressed against her chest like a shield. "Dad's coming to the alumni thing tonight?" she asked. Daniel looked up too quickly. Of course. I turned the pancake. He helped plan it. It's not a thing, Daniel said. It's a small fundraiser. He said fundraiser the way other men say golf weekend. Sophie raised one eyebrow, took 2 strawberries from the bowl, and vanished toward the stairs. She was 17, smart, anxious, and old enough to read a room even when adults tried to dim the lights. I watched her go, then looked back at Daniel's phone. A message flashed before he tilted the screen down. V, tonight changes everything. He smiled at it, not at me. The fundraiser was at the Grand Larkin Hotel downtown, an old limestone building with brass doors, velvet chairs, and a lobby that always smelled like lilies, floor wax, and money that had learned to whisper. Daniel's alumni group had rented the ballroom for a scholarship dinner, and Vanessa was on the planning committee because, according to Daniel, she was brilliant with donors. She wore a cream silk dress and moved through the room like she owned the oxygen. When she hugged Daniel, her hand stayed at the back of his neck 1 second longer than necessary. I noticed. Daniel's mother noticed too, but she smiled. Margaret Whitaker was 71, sharp as a bone saw, and allergic to any woman who did not make her son feel like the center of the room. She had never forgiven me for returning to work after Sophie started school, then never respected me when I stepped back to work part-time. To Margaret, I was either neglectful or dependent, depending on which insult best served the conversation. At dinner, she touched Vanessa's arm and said, "Some people just bring a man back to life." I looked at Daniel. He looked at his wine. That was when the first small door closed inside me. The fight happened 2 hours later at home. It began with me asking why Vanessa knew so much about our mortgage timeline and ended with Daniel accusing me of turning marriage into a spreadsheet. His face was red, his collar damp from the rain, and the kitchen still smelled of rosemary chicken cooling untouched on the stove. I did not shout. I asked him if there was another woman. He laughed once, flat and ugly, and told me paranoia was not a personality. So I performed exactly the woman he believed I was. I slammed the door. I pretended to break. Then I listened. By midnight, Daniel had gone upstairs, and I had collected enough from the baby monitor to know this was no affair with a hotel receipt and a guilty apology. This was organized. This had documents. This had wire transfers, forged e-signatures, loan fraud, and a mother-in-law who knew enough to make herself useful and guilty. I slept in the guest room with my phone under my pillow. At 5:12 a.m., I began the audit. The first rule of fraud is that people rarely hide money perfectly. They hide it emotionally. They assume the betrayed person will be too wounded to check routing numbers, too ashamed to call lenders, too exhausted to compare timestamps. Daniel had counted on grief. He should have counted on training. I made coffee strong enough to taste metallic and opened my old laptop at the breakfast table. The house was silent except for the refrigerator hum and the soft rush of rain in the gutters. I logged into our joint accounts first, then our mortgage portal, then the county recorder's office. At 6:03 a.m., I found the lien. Home equity line of credit, $91,700. Originating lender, Great Lakes Community Bank. Borrowers, Daniel A. Whitaker and Claire M. Whitaker. Closing date, October 16. Notary, Richard P. Salinger. I stared at my own name on a document I had never signed. There it was. The forged signature looked almost right, which made it worse. The C was too tall, the final R in Whitaker curled the wrong way, and the pressure pattern was smooth in a way mine had not been since arthritis started stiffening my right thumb every winter. Attached to the file was a driver's license scan, a utility bill, and an electronic consent record from an email address I had never created. claire.whitakerdocuments@fastmail.com. I wrote it down. I wrote everything down. At 6:41, Sophie padded into the kitchen in plaid pajama pants. Her face was pale, and her hair was in the same messy knot she wore when anxiety had kept her awake. She looked at the laptop, then at me. "Are you and Dad getting divorced?" The question did not knock me down. It settled beside me, heavy and honest. "I don't know yet," I said, "but whatever happens, you will not be asked to carry it." She swallowed. "Did he do something?" I closed the laptop halfway. "Yes." Her eyes filled, but did not spill. "Is it Vanessa?" Children hear more than we believe. I reached for her hand. "Partly." She nodded once, and that nod aged her in front of me. The furnace clicked again. Somewhere upstairs, Daniel's shower started, careless and loud, as if hot water still belonged to him in a house he had mortgaged behind my back. "I'm going to handle this quietly," I told her. "You do not need to defend me, spy for me, or choose sides. You only need to be 17. She squeezed my fingers. That was my oath. Over the next 9 days, I became the woman Daniel had forgotten existed. I did not confront him about the loan. I did not mention the recording. I made breakfast, answered emails, folded laundry, and asked him whether he wanted black coffee or the cinnamon blend. He watched me with relief, because guilty people love normal routines. They mistake them for surrender. At night, I worked. I requested my credit reports from all 3 bureaus and found 2 hard inquiries I had not authorized. I called Great Lakes Community Bank from the parking lot of a library in Wheaton and used words like identity theft, forged consent, and preservation letter. The branch manager stopped sounding bored after I recited the HELOC number and the fake email address. By 3:18 p.m. that day, the bank's fraud department had opened case GL 24-1187. Then I went deeper. Vanessa Cole had registered Cole Strategy Partners, LLC, 4 months earlier at 88 West Monroe Street, Suite 1402, Chicago. The suite was a virtual office. Her website claimed she specialized in legacy transition consulting, which meant nothing, and charged $225 an hour to say it. Daniel had sent her 3 payments from his private account in August and September: $7,500, $9,800, and $11,200. The memo line said donor outreach. I printed them. Margaret had transferred $15,000 into Daniel's account the day before the fake closing. The memo said, bridge help. Richard Salinger, the notary on my forged loan papers, was Margaret's cousin. His commission number was active, but barely. He had notarized only 9 documents that year, 7 for people connected to Margaret's country club. I printed that too. The red binder came from Office Depot, $8.99 before tax. I bought it at 7:06 p.m. under fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. The cashier asked if I wanted a receipt, and I almost laughed. Of all the things I had learned in fraud work, the most useful was also the most boring. Always keep the receipt. The binder filled quickly. Loan documents, county filings, screenshots, bank statements, audio transcript, IP logs from our home router showing Daniel had accessed the fake email from his laptop at 11:44 p.m. on October 12 and 6:09 a.m. on October 16th. A Ring camera clip from the side door showing Richard Salinger entering our house while I was at Sophie's cardiology appointment in Oak Brook. A copy of the appointment reminder. A parking receipt from the medical building. Small facts are not small in court. They are bricks. I called my former supervisor, Nina Barnes, who now worked as an independent forensic accountant. We met at a diner off Route 59 that smelled like old fryer oil and burnt coffee. She wore a navy blazer, carried a canvas bag full of legal pads, and listened without interrupting while I laid the first 50 pages on the table. When I finished, she said, "Claire, this is bank fraud." I know. And wire fraud if the transfer crossed state lines or used interstate systems. I know. And aggravated identity theft if they used your documents. I know. She looked at me for a long second. Are you safe at home? That question almost did what Daniel could not. It almost broke my voice. I'm safe enough, I said. Nina did not like that answer, but she respected it. She gave me the name of a family attorney, a bank fraud investigator, and a former federal prosecutor who handled private consults before referrals. She also told me something I wrote on the inside cover of the red binder. Do not warn thieves that you found the vault open. So, I didn't. Daniel became softer that week. He brought home tulips, the yellow ones I had loved when we were newlyweds, and put them in the chipped blue vase by the sink. He kissed my cheek while I was reviewing bank statements and told me he hated when we were distant. The smell of his cologne hit me with such old memory that for one foolish second I remembered the man who held Sophie in the NICU and cried into my shoulder. Then his phone buzzed. He smiled before he caught himself. Memory is not evidence. Evidence is evidence. On Thursday evening, Daniel asked me to attend a private reconciliation dinner at the Grand Larkin before the Alumni Board's final fundraiser meeting. He said Vanessa would be there, along with his mother, his attorney friend, and 2 board members. He claimed he wanted transparency, a calm path forward, a dignity-first separation if we could not repair the marriage. He used phrases he had clearly practiced. I said yes. His relief was almost tender. He had no idea. The false surrender requires patience. You must give the other side enough rope, enough silence, and enough comfort to mistake procedure for weakness. I wore a gray wool dress, low heels, and my mother's small pearl earrings. I put the red binder in a plain black tote and told Sophie I would be home late. She hugged me at the door and whispered, "Don't let him make you feel crazy." I kissed the top of her head. "Never again," I said. The Grand Larkin ballroom glowed like a jewelry box. Chandeliers reflected in polished silverware, donors laughed near the bar, and a pianist played something soft enough to make lies sound elegant. The air smelled of lilies, lemon oil, and expensive steak. Daniel stood near the front, with Vanessa at his side, and Margaret in a cashmere wrap the color of winter cream. Vanessa smiled when she saw me. It was the smile of a woman who believed the paperwork was already done. "Claire," she said, touching my arm as if we were old friends. "Thank you for coming, truly. I know this has been emotional." I looked at her hand until she removed it. Daniel cleared his throat. "We reserved the private dining room, just us first." "No," I said. "Here is fine." His smile tightened. "Claire, this isn't the place." "You chose the place." Margaret stepped forward, perfume sharp as alcohol. "Don't embarrass yourself, dear." I looked at her. Not once in 19 years had that woman called me dear when she meant anything but servant. The Alumni Board president, a tired-looking man named Howard Keene, approached with a champagne flute. "Everything all right?" Daniel gave a strained laugh. "Family matter. Claire's had a hard week." Vanessa lowered her eyes just enough to look sympathetic. "We all want what's best for Sophie." That was the line that opened the door. I set my tote on the nearest round table. The silverware gave a tiny shiver against the china. Conversations around us thinned. The pianist kept playing for 3 more measures, then stopped as if the room itself had raised a hand. I took out the red binder. Daniel saw it and blinked. Margaret's mouth tightened. Vanessa did not understand yet. "This is not a family matter," I said. My voice carried farther than I expected because I had not raised it. "This is a financial crime." Howard's champagne flute paused halfway to his lips. Daniel whispered, "Claire." I opened the binder to the first tab and placed the HELOC closing statement on the table. On October 16th, a $91,700 home equity line of credit was opened against my house using my forged signature, a fake email address, and a driver's license scan I did not provide. The room became still. Not quiet. Still. I turned to the second tab. The notary was Richard Salinger, Margaret Whittaker's cousin. Security footage places him inside my home at 9:42 a.m. that day, while I was at a cardiology appointment with my daughter. The bank's digital consent record came from an email created on Daniel's laptop and accessed through our home IP address, 73.48.119.206. Vanessa's face changed first. Color left her cheeks in a clean line. Daniel reached for the paper, but I slid it back with 2 fingers. "Don't touch evidence." Howard set down his glass. I turned another page. The first scheduled wire was $48,000 to Cole Strategy Partners, LLC. The second was $34,000 toward a rental property deposit in Scottsdale. The remaining funds were marked for reimbursement through the Whitaker Legacy Scholarship Foundation, which, according to Illinois records, has not filed a valid charitable report in 2 years. Margaret made a sound like a cough. I looked at her. You transferred $15,000 to Daniel the day before the closing. You also called Richard Salinger 11 times between October 10 and October 16. I have the call logs. She tried to laugh. This is absurd. You stole private records. No, I said. I preserved marital financial documents, public filings, my own credit records, home security footage, and bank fraud correspondence. A man near the bar murmured, Jesus. Vanessa whispered, Daniel, fix this. There it was. Not, I'm sorry. Fix this. Daniel leaned toward me, voice low and urgent. Claire, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what I'm doing. You'll ruin Sophie's life. I closed the binder halfway and looked at him for a long moment. The chandeliers hummed faintly. Somewhere in the kitchen, plates clattered, and the smell of seared butter drifted into the room. My husband stood in front of donors, board members, his mother, and his mistress, still reaching for the one lever he thought would move me. Our daughter. I opened the final tab. Sophie's 529 account was accessed on September 28th, I said. A withdrawal request for $22,400 was drafted but not submitted. The beneficiary change form was prepared under Vanessa Cole's office account. It listed a child named Mason Cole as the new beneficiary. Vanessa's mouth opened. Daniel stared at the page. Margaret whispered, Oh, Daniel. That was the first honest thing she had said all night. Howard stepped back from the table. Claire, do you have counsel? Yes. And have the authorities been notified? I glanced toward the ballroom doors. 2 men in dark suits entered first, followed by a woman with a badge clipped to her belt, and a Great Lakes Community Bank fraud investigator I recognized from a video call. They did not rush. They did not need to. Authority has its own weather. Daniel turned and saw them. For the first time that night, he looked married to consequences. The woman with the badge introduced herself as Special Agent Marla Ruiz with IRS Criminal Investigation. One of the men was from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service because the closing package had been mailed across state lines. The other was a Naperville detective assigned to financial crimes. Their shoes made soft, deliberate sounds on the ballroom floor. People moved away from Daniel and Vanessa as if fraud were contagious. Special Agent Ruiz asked Daniel to step aside. He looked at me, wounded and furious. You set me up. No, I said. You signed me up. The sentence landed clean. Vanessa began talking too fast. She said she only handled consulting. She said Daniel told her everything was agreed. She said Margaret arranged the notary. Margaret said she never read the documents. Richard Salinger was not present, which was unfortunate for him because everyone in that ballroom suddenly knew his name. Daniel said nothing. That was smarter than usual, but not smart enough. The agents did not handcuff him in the center of the ballroom. Life is not always cinematic in the way angry people want it to be. They escorted him into the private dining room first, along with Vanessa and Margaret, while the donors stood frozen between salad forks and moral judgment. I remained by the table with the red binder under my hand. Howard Keene looked at me as if he had discovered a crack in the floor just before stepping into it. The Scholarship Foundation, he said quietly. How bad? Bad enough that you need counsel before you touch another donor dollar. He nodded. His face had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Outside the private dining room, Vanessa's voice rose once. Then a door closed. The pianist did not resume playing. Nobody ate the steak. At 10:37 p.m., Daniel was taken out through the service corridor. Vanessa followed 7 minutes later, crying with mascara streaked under both eyes. Margaret was not arrested that night, but the detective took her phone in an evidence bag and informed her that a subpoena was coming. Her cashmere wrap had slipped off one shoulder, and without it, she looked smaller, older, and furious at the wrong person. She looked at me. "You destroyed this family!" I put the binder back in my tote. "No, Margaret. I documented who did." The fallout was not instant. Real consequences rarely are. They arrive in certified envelopes, court dates, frozen accounts, and the dull click of legal systems grinding forward without regard for anyone's reputation. Great Lakes Community Bank froze the HELOC before the first wire completed. Daniel was placed on unpaid leave within 48 hours because Meridian Foods had federal vendor contracts and no appetite for an operations director under investigation for bank fraud. Vanessa's consulting firm collapsed before Thanksgiving. Her website disappeared, her donors stopped answering calls, and the Illinois Real Estate Licensing Board opened an inquiry after the Scottsdale deposit paperwork surfaced. Richard Salinger lost his notary commission. Then he hired an attorney. Then he started talking. That was when Margaret's name moved from family gossip to investigative file. She had not merely made calls. She had provided my driver's license scan from a copy she kept after a family cruise paperwork request the year before. She had told Richard I was aware of the loan, but too busy with Sophie's medical appointments to appear. She had encouraged Daniel to secure liquidity before divorce because, in her words from a recovered text, Claire will weaponize the house if you let her. She had always believed I was dangerous. She was only wrong about the timing. By January, Daniel had been charged with bank fraud, wire fraud conspiracy, and aggravated identity theft. Vanessa was charged with wire fraud conspiracy and making false statements during the investigation. Richard took a plea. Margaret avoided federal charges by agreeing to testify, but she was sued by the bank and by the Scholarship Foundation's remaining board for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation. The country club suspended her membership pending resolution, which hurt her more than the lawsuit. I did not attend Daniel's first hearing for drama. I attended because my attorney told me victim statements matter. The courthouse smelled like floor wax, wet wool, and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Daniel stood in a navy suit that no longer fit quite right, his face gray, his wedding ring absent. When he saw me, his eyes filled with something that looked like regret, but might have been fear wearing better clothes. During the break, he approached with his attorney hovering nearby. "Claire," he said, "I never meant for it to become this." I looked at him. He had aged badly in 3 months. His hair had thinned at the temples, and the confidence that once made him fill every doorway had drained out of him. I remembered loving that confidence. I remembered mistaking it for strength. "You meant every step until consequences arrived," I said. He flinched. "I loved you," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That's why this worked as long as it did." There was nothing else to say. In March, the divorce finalized. I kept the house long enough for Sophie to finish the school year, then sold it on my terms with a clean title and a letter from the bank confirming the fraudulent lien had been removed. Sophie chose the college in Madison that had offered her a scholarship and a quiet dorm near the lake. On move-in day, she hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. "You look different," she said. "Older?" "No," she smiled a little. "Free!" I laughed because if I did not, I might have cried, and crying that day would have been allowed but unnecessary. I moved to a smaller townhouse in Oak Park with creaky stairs, morning sun in the kitchen, and no memories hiding in the walls. I went back to full-time forensic accounting, this time for a firm that investigated nonprofit fraud and elder financial abuse. My office smelled like toner, coffee, and new carpet. My desk had 2 monitors, a locked file drawer, and a red binder on the shelf that I kept empty as a reminder. Not every woman needs revenge. Some women need records. Daniel eventually pled guilty to 2 counts in exchange for the others being dismissed. He received 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, restitution, and the kind of public shame that follows a man into every job interview. Vanessa received probation, restitution, and the permanent death of the elegant second life she thought she had purchased with my signature. Margaret sold her townhouse and moved into an assisted living apartment near Rockford, where no one cared about her country club stories. Sophie visited Daniel once before he reported to prison. She did not tell me everything they said. She only told me he cried, apologized, and admitted he had used her name like a shield when he was really protecting himself. That mattered to her, not enough to erase what happened, but enough to stop the wound from becoming inheritance. I was grateful for that. 1 year after the night of the baby monitor, I found it again while unpacking the last box in my Oak Park closet. The plastic was still yellowed. The green light still flickered when I turned it over in my hand. For a moment, I was back in that guest room with rain on the glass and Daniel's voice coming through static, casually ending the life I thought we had built. Then, the memory changed. I no longer heard only betrayal, I heard the beginning of my own testimony. People think the truth arrives like thunder, loud enough for everyone to stop pretending. It usually doesn't. Sometimes, truth is a weak green light on an old monitor. Sometimes, it is a forged C in your own name. Sometimes, it is a woman sitting alone at 5:12 in the morning, making coffee, opening a laptop, and deciding that grief can wait until after the audit. Daniel thought leaving would make me collapse. Vanessa thought my silence meant permission. Margaret thought paperwork was just something men used to move women out of the way. They were all wrong. Blood does not make a family. Loyalty does. A shared address does not make a marriage. Honesty does. And when someone uses your love as cover for theft, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop explaining your pain and start preserving your evidence. I never became cruel. I became precise. So, if you are listening to this and you have ever been called dramatic for noticing the pattern, paranoid for asking the question, or cold for keeping the receipt, remember this: quiet is not weakness. Calm is not surrender. And the person who documents the truth does not need to shout when the truth can speak in court. Comment your age and where you are watching from, and tell me this: if you heard what I heard through that baby monitor, would you confront them immediately? Or would you build the red binder first? Subscribe to the channel for more stories about betrayal, family karma, and the quiet kind of justice that arrives with evidence.